I believe there are moments, decisions that are made in every movement that will determine the fate of the cause or the mission. It comes back to a choice that sometimes is made by one or a few to fall back or to lean forward, to take an incredible personal risk or play it safe, to play nice and make friends with those in power, or create the tension needed to demand real change. Think about the moment, the decision that Mother Till made to keep her son, her baby boy, Emmett, his casket open, which led Rosa Parks to refuse to give up her seat on a bus, which then began the Montgomery bus boycotts, which then led 4 students in Greensboro, North Carolina, to sit down at a segregated lunch counter. Friends, I'm here today to ask you to do something never done before, never done in the history of our world. I'm here to ask you, the American church, to join the pro-life generation, to put our nation back together in now this post-Roe era. I implore you to help us achieve our mission that has thus far spanned 5 decades as we move it from Washington, D.C. to state by state, city by city, church by church, to make abortion unthinkable and unavailable. I'm here today, joining you virtually, to ask you to make a decision for life, for millions of lives. And it's not simply rhetorical. This is a serious, significant ask. For the past several months, my family and I, we've been traveling throughout the American South. And the history we have found in nearly every little town we wander through often causes me to stop and reflect upon the tragedy our nation experienced in slavery and the devastating Civil War. As I conduct interview after interview about the Supreme Court's recent Dobbs decision, which reversed Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Planned Parenthood, I'm continued to be asked about how we take our country back, what our next steps are in each state legislature, in each city, what we envision as pro-life activists for the future of our nation. And during these conversations, or sometimes debates, I can't help but think back to the Civil War and to the resulting Reconstruction effort after the Civil War. It's a topic rarely discussed in our culture and our history classes. Its failure, and then finally the Civil Rights Movement, which finally saw success 99 years after the surrender at Appomattox. We rarely discuss this moment in time. For decades, though, we had Black Americans who had been emancipated from the horror of slavery, who lived with regular Supreme Court sanctioned segregation, discrimination, in fear of night rides from the Klan, and those in authority and power who simply looked the other way. And I would say that it was through our own inaction, the most powerful institution in our nation, our church, permitted it to go on. It was in solitary confinement in the margins of a newspaper in Birmingham that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to white clergymen explaining the price of inaction and pleading for them to join him. He wrote, "I have almost reached the most regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a myth of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people of ill will. He wrote further, there was a time when the church was very powerful. It was during this period that early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was this thermostat that transformed the mores of our society. But things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak and ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consumed by the church's often vocal sanction of things as they are. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will have lost its authentic ring, forget the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as a relevant social club with no meaning. I meet young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. Sadly, it took 100 years from the end of the Civil War until the passage of the Civil Rights Act to achieve what Martin Luther King was referring to as this positive peace. It took the murder of a little boy named Emmett in rural Mississippi, and then his murderer's acquittal that led to one woman refusing to give up her seat, which inspired the marches in the streets, the bus freedom rides, the student-led lunch counter sit-ins, which resulted then in days and weeks in jail time, accepting the singing pain of water hoses, death threats, bombings, and assassinations. It took 99 years. Friends, the hour is upon us that we have worked for so long, that many of you have been working for before I was even thought of. It's here. Step one of our mission, reversing the egregiously decided Roe v. Wade decision, is complete. But we have more to do. We have more steps to go, and the American church must lead it. You must lead it. For we can't tolerate decades more to reconstruct our nation, to put back together what the Supreme Court broke in 1973. Make no mistake, the battles we will face and are facing right now will be physical, political, and spiritual. In our city streets, the violence that so many support behind the closed doors of Planned Parenthood is being committed openly and justified by many in power. In state houses, those who've been elected, who've promised us of their pro-life credentials, are going to be forced to finally act, to cast votes that will determine the fate of abortion laws, determine the fate of human lives in their state. And I predict that some of those who've said they've been with us all along won't be there when the final tally comes in. In our homes, our daughters and our granddaughters will be ordering chemical abortion pills shipped from overseas or from other states that could very well result in her own injury, infertility, or death. She'll be aborting her child, your grandchild, in her bathroom, and every morning returning to the scene of the crime. In our workplaces, women and men are hurting from past abortion decisions. Many of them made to finally reckon with a choice that they made decades ago. And in our churches, what are we doing? Will we be a thermostat that can transform the mores of society of our nation? Or will we simply be a thermometer? I believe it's not too late to become the former, but this will rely on you. First, I must ask you to commit, to compel your parish, your church to act. Show up at the youth group and tell them about the truth of the violence of abortion. Show them how they can step up and join the pro-life generation. Convince your priest, convince your pastor to speak now about abortion. Start a ministry for post-abortive men and women or pregnant and parenting young people in your community. A great first step is to sign up for Standing With Her Sunday, a national simulcast happening on Sunday, August 28th, with leaders from across the pro-life and Christian movements in America. Go to standingwithhersunday.org and sign up to host this national simulcast, which will give Christians a virtual tool belt for how to help those, how to have honest conversations about the violence of abortion, about the non-violent alternatives that exist in your community. Sign up and host this virtual simulcast at your church or your small group. The second thing you can do right now is envision what your city, what your community could look like when abortion is unthinkable. Ask yourself what you, your parish, or what your community must do right now to step up and ensure that women and families in crisis will be connected immediately to those in help. What can you do? And don't be afraid to think big. Think big in this task. 16 years ago, I was given an opportunity to launch Students for Life of America. Newly married and just turned 21, I remember the very well-meaning suggestions from my very first mentors who appreciated the enthusiasm I was planning to bring to the pro-life movement, but asked me to tamper down my expectations for what we would achieve, who told me saying we were going to become the first post-Roe generation, by saying that we were establishing a post-Roe organization, I sounded too naive, that it wasn't going to be possible. I challenge you today to remember who it is we serve, the creator of our universe, and what he can and has done. Finally, friends, be the messenger in this new post-Roe era. Quell the flames of fear that Planned Parenthood is fanning throughout this generation. Show them the truly, dare I say, progressive view that we have for our nation. That in 2022, no woman has to choose between the life of her child and her educational or career goals. That we have a forward-looking vision for our nation, not backward-looking, as those who promote abortion do. Tell America about the more than 3,000 pregnancy resource centers, more than 400 maternity homes that vastly outnumber abortion facilities in our land. Know the resources in your community, like standingwithyou.org, supportafterabortion.org, abortionpillreversal.org, where you can refer women and men in crisis immediately. This is fundamental, as 73% of the neighbors we speak with at Students for Life do not know the nonviolent resources the pro-life movement has been starting, sustaining, and supporting for decades in our communities. Now that the Supreme Court has finally righted the wrongs of Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Planned Parenthood, what decision for life will you make? What course of action are you going to take which will determine the fate of our movement, whether our movement finally achieves our ultimate goal of abolishing abortion? In the course of our family's travels, we've gone to Appomattox, where the Civil War ended. I've taken them to the battlefields in Gettysburg and Vicksburg, which were the keys to Union victory. I've shown my children the old mansion a mile from where I grew up, which was one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad in what was Virginia at the time. I've gone to Montgomery, where Ms. Parks refused to give up her seat. I've taken the kids to the lunch counter in Greensboro. At every history, homeschool history, field trip stop, I'd like to ask my children, what would they have done? If it were them, would they have had the courage to do the hard thing, to make the hard decision, to stand for the vulnerable others facing injustice? Would they have gotten on the bus knowing as soon as they pulled into Jackson, Mississippi, they'd be arrested? Would they have sat down at the lunch counter knowing they were likely to be beat? But I no longer have to look back in our history and ask those questions because history is happening right now. Today, will you make a decision to seek a positive peace, to stand for innocent children alongside their mothers, getting to work to ensure that no woman stands alone in post-Roe America? Or will you simply accept a negative peace? For me, my family, and our entire pro-life generation that's active on more than 1,300 campuses with more than 150,000 trained young people, a generation I can truly say I am honored and privileged to lead, we will seek a positive peace. Thank you.